Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's knowledge session on certification of green hydrogen. My name is Theresa Jocham from the Indo-German Energy Forum, and I will guide you through this session today. So exciting developments are happening in Europe, but also in India. India is aiming to become a global hydrogen hub and may become one of the largest green hydrogen exporters in the world. But how to assure the hydrogen importing countries that the imported hydrogen is really green? So this is the topic of today's event. Please now welcome with me Dr. Nicole Glanemann, Deputy Head Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, Government of Germany.
Namaskar and a warm welcome to this knowledge session on certification of green hydrogen. My name is Dr. Nicole Glanemann, Deputy Head of Bilateral Energy Cooperation in the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. As you may all be aware of, the government of Germany aims for climate neutrality by 2045. Therefore, we need to expand the renewable energies, as well as we need to diversify our energy mix further. This is why in June 2020, my ministry, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, BMWI, published the National Hydrogen Strategy of Germany. The goal is to have 5 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity in Germany until 2030 and 10 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity until 2040. Another important goal of the National Hydrogen Strategy is to promote an international hydrogen economy. First, because it's a global effort to bring down the costs of hydrogen. Second, because there's no doubt that Germany will remain a net importer of energy, also in a climate neutral world. This is why the government of Germany has committed more than 9 billion euros to support the establishment of a hydrogen economy. Those funds are part of the Green Recovery Package in reaction to COVID-19. 2 billion euros are foreseen for green hydrogen project developments outside Europe. Once these projects are able to produce green hydrogen, Germany would be certainly interested to import this green fuel. To be able to clearly determine how green the important hydrogen is, certification will be required. Therefore, I'm thankful to the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce and the Indo-German Energy Forum for having organized today's webinar with the focus on certification of green hydrogen. Which requirements green hydrogen from India and elsewhere must meet to enter the European market? Which requirements green hydrogen must meet to be included in the different funding schemes which aim to bring down the costs for the consuming European industry? I'm looking forward to get some answers on these questions from today's expert presentations and wish us all new and inspiring insights. Thank you so much.
So thank you. Without further ado, let's directly jump into the topic of today's event. And now Mr. Jan Schieler, Managing Consultant at Guidehouse, will give us an overview on the EU certification framework sustainability criteria for green hydrogen. Over to you, Mr. Schieler.
Thank you, Teresa. Just give me a second to share my presentation. Can you see my screen now or not yet?
Yes, we can see it. Now we can, we can see the presentation. Now
Perfect.
yes. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let's get started. Well, good afternoon to most of you. Good morning to some of you. As Teresa already introduced, my name is Jan Sihler. I work as a managing consultant at a consultancy called Guidehouse. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the sustainability criteria for green hydrogen production in Europe specifically. A little bit about the company I work for. So Guidehouse is a consultancy that works both for public and commercial sector. We have around 12,000 people globally. I work in the practice called Energy, Sustainability and Infrastructure. One of our focus areas is hydrogen and alternative fuels. And we have done quite a lot of work in the different aspects of hydrogen regulation, both in Europe and North America. And I'm going to be talking to you about part of that today. With that, let's jump straight into the interesting content. The first question really is, why do we need any kind of sustainability criteria for green hydrogen at all? And I think this chart illustrates this problem quite well. Worldwide, the most common method currently to produce hydrogen is with steam methane reforming. That's on the very left-hand side of this chart. And that's a very greenhouse gas intensive process, as you can see. But when a lot of people talk about the alternative production method for hydrogen, which is electrolysis, they might not realize that if you were simply to put an electrolyzer in Germany and connect it to the grid, for instance, in 2018, as shown on this graph, then the emission footprint of that hydrogen produced by electrolysis would be even higher, or at least equivalent to those made from natural gas. So that's, of course, something that we want to avoid. Therefore, we need to bring the greenhouse gas intensity of the hydrogen produced more to the right-hand side of the chart, where with different criteria you can achieve a very low emission footprint. I will remark that, of course, in Asia and I think also in India, another very common production method is coal gasification, but that, of course, has even higher emission footprint than making hydrogen from natural gas. There are many different standards already in place or in development that aim to define essentially what green hydrogen is. This list here is not exhaustive, but you can see that on the European Union level, there is a couple of different standards that are trying to define that. In Germany, there are standards as well as Netherlands, France, or California. But I think also Paula will talk later specifically about the one in Germany that her company is working on. So she will give you more insight into that. What I will focus on is at the top line of this slide. So the definition of green hydrogen under the Renewable Energy Directive in Europe, which essentially is binding for all European countries and also for potential imports of green hydrogen to Europe. I'll not bother you too much with the legal language, but what is important to remember is that the Renewable Energy Directive 2, or RED, as you can see it on this slide, essentially sets out, is one of the most important laws guiding the energy transition in Europe. And it also defines the criteria for green hydrogen production in Europe. There's a specific term that it uses, and maybe good to illustrate it here because I will be using it throughout the presentation. It calls the green hydrogen RFNBO or REFUNBO. That means renewable fuels of non-biological origin. It's a mouthful, but in a simple way, it means essentially green hydrogen made from electrolysis using renewable electricity, and also synthetic fuels that are potentially derived from that hydrogen. The Renewable Energy Directive differentiates 3 production cases for that green hydrogen or REFUNBO. let's start with case one. Case one, also called the average grid electricity, is essentially for countries which already have significantly decarbonized electricity grid, so very low emissions in their electricity grids. And there it simply says the share of the total produced green hydrogen in that country will be equivalent to the share of renewables on the electricity grid. How would that work practically? This is one of the ways to illustrate it. So the lines that you see here are essentially the average greenhouse gas grid emission intensity factors for different European countries. And that green area at the bottom and everything below it are countries that are meeting a predefined threshold for how low essentially their grid emission intensity has to be eligible for case one. There is a predefined essentially threshold in the Renewable Energy Directive that says that only if a country has a very low grid emission factor, then that potentially can be considered for case one. If you want to take a look at a specific example, let's take Sweden, which is the orange line at the almost very bottom. So Sweden would then qualify for this criteria under case one. And I think Sweden has around 50% of its electricity on annual basis coming from renewables. The rest is nuclear. Therefore, if you were to produce 100 gigawatt hours of hydrogen in Sweden under case one, 50% of that, so 50 gigawatt hours, would qualify as this green hydrogen. So that's case one. The other option under the Renewable Energy Directive is case two, which is called direct connection. And that's maybe the simplest way that's illustrated in the Renewable Energy Directive. What that means is that you could either have what's called a isolated direct connection between the source of renewable electricity, meaning the wind farm, the solar farm, or the hydropower plant, and the electrolyzer. So there is only essentially a cable between those two and no grid connection whatsoever. The alternative to that would be essentially a direct grid connection, but also direct connection between the renewable electricity plant and the electrolyzer, but also grid connection. And in that case, you would have to apply smart metering. This case two essentially is foreseen as a fast track because it, in theory, is the easiest way to implement, and the European Commission also thinks that this case will be applicable into many international countries. And because, as you will see in just a moment, the last case, which is called the case production case 3, is quite a bit more complicated, but it might be the most common, at least at the beginning. So moving on to case 3, you will see that that defines cases in which you still want to put your electrolyzer into a country which has actually not decarbonized its electricity system. It still has very high emissions coming from the electricity system, but you want to put your electrolyzer there, you want to connect it to the grid, and you would like to claim that the hydrogen that you produce this way is again green, or the refundable, as the definition says. If you try to claim that, the Renewable Energy Directive defines 3 additional criteria that you would have to fulfill: additionality, temporal correlation, and geographical correlation. So let's dive into that specifically. A little bit about the definitions, what these 3 criteria mean under case 3. So additionality essentially means that the fuel producer or the hydrogen producer would be adding to the deployment or financing of additional renewables, additional renewable electricity generation on the grid. simply meaning that for each megawatt of capacity of electrolyzer, there should be an equivalent of that, more or less, added in terms of wind electricity generation, solar, etc. The second element or requirement is regarding temporal correlation between when the electricity is produced and when the electricity is consumed. We will get into detail about that in just a second. And the last, but definitely not least requirement is geographical correlation, which says something similar. It essentially says that there has to be some kind of correlation between where the electricity is produced and where it is being consumed. Why is all this important at all, actually? Why to make it so complicated and have all these extra criteria on the production? Essentially, the starting point is that if you would have no additionality, so again, if you would just simply place your electrolyzer and start producing a lot of green hydrogen somewhere without adding additional capacity of renewables on the grid, then you would take away from direct electrification, from electric vehicles, from electrification of heating, etc. And in many countries, that would actually lead into increased fossil electricity generation, because in many countries, the marginal plant would be the fossil generator, whether it's coal, natural gas, or oil, depending on the specific country. So that's why additionality. The temporal correlation has a somewhat similar idea why it's there. Again, temporal correlation meaning that there has to be some kind of equivalence between when the unit of electricity, renewable electricity, is produced and when it's being consumed. That's there because if you imagine that you are an electrolyzer operator and you would be operating also at night, so you'll be operating 24/7, but you would only source your electricity from a solar farm, then obviously the solar farm cannot cover your consumption at night. And you would be at night, at minimum, again, increasing fossil electricity generation. The last bit here is the geographic correlation. That essentially means a simplest example would be, imagine that you place the electrolyzer in one country that is quite far away from where your contracted wind or solar farm would be. And there is simply no physical way of those electrons reaching you. That would mean that maybe you help to add additional renewables in the country that you're sourcing from, but locally you would again increase emissions because your consumption would have to be covered by the local electricity generation, in many countries most likely by fossil. So that's why the Commission the European Commission put those criteria in place. And the last bit I wanted to show you is about how this could be practically implemented. This is as far as what's publicly known. My company has been supporting the European Commission in developing the ways to implement the regulation. So this is a summary of what also we have been discussing quite intensely with them. On the additionality, how to fulfill that would be that you essentially strike a power purchase agreement, so a direct contractual relationship between the renewable electricity plant, wind and solar, and that would also have to be new. So it would have to be all built recently, and there's a specific, of course, criteria for what recently means. And it also should not be subsidized. So it should be fully financed by the developer under market prices, essentially, or prices that are agreed with the hydrogen producer. There is an alternative to it in which also older renewable electricity plants coming away from the subsidy schemes, as in the case, for instance, with a lot of onshore wind in Germany, that will no longer be eligible for subsidy schemes. That if you can, as a electrolyzer producer, demonstrate that you can help extend with your financing the lifetime of that plant, that those could be also eligible, but that is more or less, I think, a marginal case. So what's important to remember is really that most likely what will be required in Europe, that there is a direct contractual relationship between the generators of electricity and between the hydrogen producer. The second, on temporal correlation, again, it tries to determine how strictly do you have to follow the electricity generation of the solar or wind farm that you have contracted, and that can be done very strictly. The maximum strictness possible in Europe is 15 minutes following. So for in every 15 minutes, you would have to adjust your consumption according to the production. It's not possible in all European countries. Some of them are only, in some of them it's only possible on hourly basis, but you can make it much less strict. Of course, you can, for instance, just do yearly matching, in which you say, on an annual basis, I want the production of electricity that I've contracted to be the same to my consumption. An alternative to that, that's also defined, is a system matching based on predefined criteria. So the simplest way to imagine that is that the electricity transmission system operator would say ahead to some of the electrolyzer operators that, well, there will be hours in which there will be a very high share of renewables on the grid, or the grid will have very low greenhouse emission factor. Therefore, you're allowed to produce regardless of what your contracted solar or wind farm is actually doing. So that's an alternative to the temporal correlation that's also being considered. And last but not least is the geographical correlation. So just quickly on that. In the most likely definition is that the solar or wind farm that you're sourcing from would have to be located in the same bidding zone. The concept of a bidding zone essentially is defined as an area where you have the same electricity market prices. And in Europe, that practically means in most instances a country, but some countries are split into multiple bidding zones, Sweden, Italy, for instance. And so that you would have to ensure that essentially your solar or wind farm is in the same country or same bidding zone as your electrolyzer. I know this is a lot to digest, especially if you see it for the first time, but I think what's important to remember is that there are different ways, essentially, that the Renewable Energy Directive defines how green hydrogen can be produced in Europe. We think that internationally, most countries will probably go, or most producers probably goes for case 2, that's their connection, but all three of them are potentially very important. The last thing I'd like to say is, and I think Miriam will talk about it a lot more later as well, is that all green hydrogen imports to European Union will have to meet these criteria that I just talked about in order to qualify essentially as green hydrogen, or that refundable term that I mentioned before. So this is, of course, important not only for Europe, but also indirectly globally. With that, I'd like to leave it at this. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be looking forward to the questions later on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gila. I would like to inform you all that the speakers have agreed that all the presentation slides will be shared with you after the knowledge session. And if you have any question, please feel free to ask them in the chat. At the end of the inputs by the speakers, we will have a Q&A session. And now, Mrs. Auer Saupe, Business Line Manager, Climate Action Certification at TÜV Süd Energietechnik GmbH, will present us the certification systems on hydrogen and its relevance for a sustainable future. So over to you, Ms. Auer Saupe.
Thank you, Ms. Jocham. Can you all see my presentation?
Yes, we can see it, but actually we see the wrong
the
version.
Other way around. Okay.
You need to swap the monitors.
Yeah, 1 second. So now it's fine for you?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for the introduction and the invitation to speak here today. So I work for TÜV Süd, which is an international TIC company with about 25,000 employees all around the globe. And today I would like to guide you through the following agenda. We will have a look at certification of hydrogen. Is it really necessary? Then we will have a look at the colorful world of hydrogen, following by regulations on hydrogen, not so deep as Jan already informed us really well about RED 2. We will dive deeper in the functioning of the product certification system and existing standards in Germany. And I will close the session with an outlook, what can we expect in the future. So, certification of hydrogen, is that really necessary? In a purely renewable world, we would say no. But in short term, that means in the time where we will have a significant part of fossil energy in our energy mix, that means at least until 2050, yes. And why is that so? Because produced hydrogen should contribute significantly to climate protection. Produced hydrogen must emit remarkably less greenhouse gases than conventionally produced one, and it needs to consider the whole value chain. Certification gives clear criteria for industry and investors as to which hydrogen technologies are suitable and sustainable for the future. And last but not least, it prevents double counting of CO2 reduced hydrogen. So when we have a look at the different colors of hydrogen, we see black, brown, gray hydrogen, which is coming from fossil sources. And the typical source is from steam reformed natural gas. Pink hydrogen is hydrogen generated through electrolysis by nuclear energy. And we talk about blue hydrogen when it's again coming from fossil sources, but in combination with carbon capture and storage. That means CO2 is captured and not released into the atmosphere. Then we also have turquoise hydrogen, which is also based on fossil fuels. It's produced with pyrolytics, and CO2 is again captured. And then we have green hydrogen, which is based on renewable energies. So when we have a look at the regulations on hydrogen, we see that the EU is on the forefront. The EU sets targets for decarbonization and the use of renewable energies. The Fit for 55 package has the objective to reduce CO2 emissions till 2030 by 55% compared to 1990. And in the transport sector, the share of renewable energy shall be 14% by 2030, whereas 2.6% of these fuels should come from renewable fuel from non-biologic origin, RFNBO. And in industry, 50% of fuels need to come from hydrogen from RFNBO. So this slide gives an overview about the utilization and criteria of hydrogen in different industry sectors and which article of RED 2 is responsible for it. So we see there will be a registry for, or a guarantee of origin registry for hydrogen, and there are goals for the utilization in industry, transport, heat and cooling. So hydrogen plays a significant role within the RED II directive. Now, when we have a look at the functioning of a product certification system, there are two different approaches: the book and claim approach and the mass balance approach. And I will first explain how the book and claim approach functions, and then we will follow with the mass balance approach. So here we see in the book and claim approach, there is a hydrogen unit produced. And in the book and claim approach, the physical hydrogen is separated from its renewable attribute. So the physical hydrogen without any claim goes to a hydrogen trader and then is sold to the industry without a claim. At the same time, the attribute renewable energy is put on a guarantee of origin and can be traded within a GOO registry. So from one trader to another until the end, an end consumer says, here, myself, I would like to consume 100% hydrogen coming from renewable sources. And then the guarantee of origin is cancelled within the registry, and the attribute renewable is put together with the physical energy, with the physical hydrogen again, and can be consumed by the end consumer. In the mass balance approach, the physical hydrogen and the renewable attributes sticks together, and the whole value chain is verified. And it really starts at the beginning of the value chain with the cultivation, for example, of sugar beet. There it is checked if it's really sustainable cultivated. And then at each process step, a verification is done again, and this continues from trader to trader until the end consumer. So here we see three existing certification systems which are well known and applied within Germany. We have here ISCC, International Sustainability and Carbon Certification. We have Certify and the TÜV Süd standard Green Hydrogen. These three standards differentiate in certain areas. We see that they all require 100% renewable sources. TÜV Süd has additional criteria for the electricity supply. For example, out of the 100%, 30% from the renewable energies need to come from renewable energy plants that are not older than 3 years. Then the standards differentiate in regard to the GHG reduction requirements. We see here ISCC has no requirements regarding GHG reduction. Certify requires at least a 60% GHG reduction, and TÜV Süd, depending on the process, how green hydrogen is produced, a 60 to 75% reduction. And these are including emissions related to compression, liquefaction, and transportation. And then last but not least, the standards also differentiate in regard to the certification approach. IACC uses mass balance, certify the book and claim approach, and TÜV Süd clients can choose one of the two options. So when we look into the future, what can we expect? There will be a new release of the TÜV Süd Green Hydrogen standard in December this year. With this new standard, we will introduce two levels of certification. There will be a basic certification with basic requirements, which we then call green hydrogen. And there will be the possibility to certify green hydrogen plus, which has additional criteria. For example, the basic criteria are, of course, 100% renewable energy, and the book and claim approach is sufficient. If someone decides to go for green hydrogen plus, the mass balance system is obligatory, and power plants delivering renewable electricity are maximum 1 year older than the electrolyzer. So we are already trying to use the RED II directives. And renewable electricity, which gets production support, is not accepted according to Green Hydrogen Plus. By the end of December, the Commission shall adopt the delegated acts by establishing a union methodology, and this will have an impact on all existing and future certification schemes. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I hand over to Ms. Jocham.
Thank you very much, Ms. Auer-Saupe. Now we come to our next speaker, Ms. Miriam Brandes, Senior Political and Regulatory Affairs Officer at the European Energy Exchange EEX, who will give us insights into the green hydrogen trading in Europe, opportunities and requirements. Over to you, Ms. Brandes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation here, the invitation to speak. I would focus rather on the trading side of green hydrogen. So how can green hydrogen be traded together with the certificates, but also as a physical commodity? So I trust I can really build my presentation on the presentations of Jan and Paula, which gave you already an overview on the certification side. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. First of all, who are we as EEX, as European Energy Exchange? We run exchange markets, exchange platforms for energy and other commodities worldwide. Our main area of action of our business is in Europe, but we also have offices in the US and in Asia. We have an office in Singapore. We are the biggest power trading exchange worldwide. Further to power, we trade on our markets, natural gas can be traded, but also CO2 emission certificates under the EU ETS, the EU emission trading scheme, and a couple of other commodities associated to energy, but also beyond, can be traded on our markets. What is very special to exchange trading is that it is an anonymous trading. So traders never know who is actually behind a trade. This comes because we also provide automated and central settling of all contracts that have been concluded on our platforms. So traders never know who is actually their counterpart. That is an important point. It is exchange trading in our case is purely B2B business, so it's a wholesale market. Trading participants on our platform are mainly utilities, but also companies from the industry segment, from transport segment. It's steel manufacturers, it's car manufacturers, just to name a few. So these companies are trading energy and commodities purely on a B2B basis on our platforms. Then we provide our platforms under transparent and clear conditions. So the conditions for trading are basically the same for everyone. Through that, we are able to publish prices, transparent prices on the trades that were concluded on our platforms, and also we publish information on the volumes being traded on our platforms. And then all this comes together with a clear and very high regulation of our market. So we are highly supervised by the respective supervisory authorities on our market. This is us as exchange. Yeah, I will like to give you an overview how we plan with hydrogen trading and what are the benefits of trading hydrogen also on an exchange like us. Just quickly, when it comes to my role, I've been working with EEX since 11 years. I work in the Political and Regulatory Affairs Department, and I take care of our hydrogen activities together with a colleague from the business development team. And yeah, I'm happy to answer also your questions later in the Q&A section. Next slide, please. Thanks a lot. Yeah, why do we believe trading green hydrogen is a good idea, and also trading hydrogen on a multilateral basis, not only on a bilateral basis between a producer and a consumer, but also broadening that to a platform where there are many consumers, many producers meeting each other. First of all, hydrogen markets, multilateral hydrogen markets are able to connect an international production of hydrogen being transported through ships over the seas of the world, being imported to several countries through ports, and then meeting a domestic hydrogen production. So the markets are able to connect both a global production of hydrogen and then also a domestic hydrogen production within a certain country. Also, hydrogen markets are able to connect this to hydrogen storage on a market price level. So the market price will be able to incentivize either to store hydrogen or to release the stored hydrogen, to consume hydrogen, to sell hydrogen. This is all what the market is connecting based on the market price level. We believe markets are able to provide transparency, be it on the prices, on the market prices, but also on the volumes. Prices, of course, is very important for many stakeholders in the hydrogen business. It's important as an information source for making dedicated investment decisions, and for many other things. It's of course important to know what is actually the price of green hydrogen. A green hydrogen market is able to provide an income source for the hydrogen producers. I mean, in Europe, we're speaking a lot about subsidies for the hydrogen producers, but in the long run, the markets, of course, are also able to provide them with an income source beyond subsidies. Markets are able to connect everything, basically. They are able to connect the hydrogen, they are able to the ammonia, hydrogen or ammonia being produced out of hydrogen. they are able to connect them with the certificate markets as well, and where this is relevant also to a power market, for instance. So we might be able to connect through the market price the power prices, the power markets to the hydrogen price, to the hydrogen markets, and it's all bundled within these through the connection of the market price signal. Hydrogen markets, multilateral hydrogen markets under transparent conditions provide a level playing field for various producers and consumers of green hydrogen, be they small, be they big, so they all have the same trading conditions, and through that level playing fields provided to them. And last but not least, multilateral trading platforms, multilateral markets for green hydrogen help to secure security of supply, as a diverse field of different actors meets at one marketplace, and they are able to level to meet demand and supply if markets are liquid enough to do so. Next slide, please. Many thanks. I mean, until we get there, until we get to a liquid market for green hydrogen, this obviously takes a while. We are not yet there. We are in Europe. We're basically starting with that, and the investments and are starting now, and the entire ramp-up process for reaching a hydrogen market is starting now. So it's a long journey to get there. It's a long journey. It will be a long journey to reach a liquid market, but it's starting now, and we as EX, we try to accompany this process from the start, and want to grow with the uptaking hydrogen market. How hydrogen can be traded from our perspective is, at the one hand side, we will see when in a couple of years grid-bound hydrogen. Please excuse me that I focus quite on Europe, because that is obviously the area I know best when it comes to the hydrogen uptake. So in Europe, we're focusing. We will see grid-bound hydrogen being produced through pipelines similar to natural gas in a couple of years. The infrastructure is not yet there. It's about to be built up, partly in old natural gas pipelines, partly it's completely new infrastructure that has to be built up. Then once this is there, we expect hydrogen to be transported through the grid, through the pipes, and we will see a continuous supply of this over a certain period of time, like we have in the power or natural gas markets. So the physical delivery of any green hydrogen will then take place through balancing group connected to the consumer and also to the producer, of course. Trading will, in this case, take place for a certain delivery period. So traders will agree on a certain delivery period to deliver hydrogen, to take hydrogen out of the grid, and agree on a fixed market price over this delivery period for a fixed amount of green hydrogen also. This is how the grid-bound hydrogen will be traded. This is something we expect to start in Europe from 2025 onwards. Something that will take place quite soon, or what we expect to happen quite soon, is transport of hydrogen or hydrogen derivatives such as ammonia or PTX products, or the so-called RFNBOs, off grid through ships, through trucks, trains, containers, So this is something that can happen already quite soon. There is established transport infrastructure specifically for ammonia, and this transport infrastructure also is an international one. So it's going to be over the big seas and with big vessels. So that is already there. Physical delivery and also trading are then, in this case, quite different to the grid-bound case, let's say. We will see the physical delivery then in pulses, rather similar to the LNG delivery. So once a ship arrives at a port, then it's obviously physically being delivered. We will see then a direct transfer from the producer, from the hydrogen producer, or the service company delivering the hydrogen to a port to the consumer. What we as a market operator could think of is basically also the creation of central storages, where basically to create a central storage where the physical hydrogen or the ammonia PTX products is then being stored, and the consumers can take it from there in order to make the process a bit more straightforward, let's say. In this case, and this delivery in pulses, let's say, market prices are fixed for a certain amount, for a fixed amount of hydrogen ammonia PTX product at a point in time, and not over a period of time, obviously. And that is what we expect to happen first before the grid-bound hydrogen. On our existing market, we see basically two market segments, and that is also what we expect to happen for the hydrogen. The first market segment I'd like to mention is the spot markets, which is the short-term market delivery, the physical delivery of an energy carrier of the energy takes place right after trading or very shortly after trading. In the power market, we are speaking about day ahead, so delivery then takes place 1 day after trading, and also we do that in the gas segment. So that is something we expect for the hydrogen market as well. However, this requires a somewhat decent amount of physical hydrogen ammonia PTX fuel to be available for immediate delivery. What we expect to be established first is future markets, where the delivery of the physical energy carrier takes place at a certain point in time in the future, but the prices are fixed today. So traders can, or consumers, producers can agree on a fixed price for the future, can hedge the price by that, and also they agree on a volume and hedge any volume risk associated. So they can agree on something today already. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. How does all this connect to certificates? Certificates are a very important aspect of green hydrogen trading. Physically, green, gray, pink, Paula mentioned all these colors, hydrogen as well as ammonia and so on is completely the same thing, and they cannot be distinguished from each other, but they are, of course, the different kinds of hydrogen production are, of course, different when it comes to their climate impact or other kinds of impacts. Hydrogen certificates are a very crucial central aspect of green hydrogen trading, because it's the only way to really prove the origin of hydrogen or an energy carrier, to state it more generally. Paula stated it quite clear. There are two basic systems in Europe existent, and we see they being operated in the power segment, specifically the guarantees of origin, the book and claim system, and for the biogas segment we see rather the mass balance system. So both systems are being applied in Europe. The guarantees of origin book and claim system is a system where the certificate can be traded separately from the physical energy carrier, while as we saw in the mass balance system, we see physical ties between the certificate and the physical energy carrier. When it comes to the international trade, I mean, this is a European system so far. When it comes to the international trade with hydrogen, ammonia, and PDX products, but also with certificates, there is a need for a system that allows, at least for the mutual recognition of certificates, of attributes, let's say. And also there needs to be a certain set of internationally harmonized rules for those certificates. So certificates need to be somewhat standardized to understand the value of a certificate being issued by an issuing so-called issuing body. Those registries Paula also mentioned, to understand that that a certificate being issued by an issuing body outside my own legislation is equivalent to one being issued by the issuing body of my legislation. So there needs to be a set of standards and harmonized rules for that. And also we need a set of technical infrastructure to be able to transfer internationally hydrogen certificates, or also to cancel them, so to use them in a sense. This is necessary to have technical infrastructure for that as well. Next slide, please. Good. Thanks a lot. When it comes to the outlook, or how we think the future of certificate trading or the future of green hydrogen trading will develop, I mean, looking at Europe, Jan mentioned the regulatory legislative pieces that are under development currently. Name again the Delegated Act under the Renewable Energy Directive 2. As everyone, we're expecting the publication of this. I mean, it's not yet there, and it should be published until the end of the year. And as Jan stated, this Delegated Act will define the system and the characteristics of green hydrogen. So without that, there is not yet a clear definition for that. Also, we're looking into international initiatives that there are numerous to define green hydrogen, to develop an international definition and understanding of what is green hydrogen. And also some of these international initiatives or international organizations look into establishing systems to internationally transfer green hydrogen certificates. And that is something we, as a market operator, we support very much. We believe it's an important aspect of hydrogen trading, and there needs to be somewhat of an international system to be able to create this international market for green hydrogen, for ammonia, for PTX products or RFNBOs. So thanks a lot, and I'm happy to answer your question in the Q&A session. And if you have any questions afterwards, please do not hesitate to get in touch. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Brandes. So once again, yes, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat. We will now have the Q&A session. So I will hand over to Mr. Tobias Winter, Director of the Indo-German Energy Forum, who will moderate the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, then first of all, thank you very much to our three German experts or connected from Germany. Your presentations are of highest commercial importance for our Indian participants. As Teresa said in the very beginning, India is aiming to become a global hydrogen hub, eyeing on exports to Europe, and therefore your inputs are of very high value. A lot of questions have come in already. Maybe if you allow, let me start with you, Mr. Silla from Guidehouse. Maybe if you could put this slide again with the table of the different certification schemes, which you have shown in the very beginning. I don't know if this would be possible.
It would be possible, but I do not have the presentation rights at the moment. So somebody will have to give
it. I'll just give you the rights. Yes, just give me a moment.
The question is related to the different norms, and the idea was if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more on this table with the different scheme and which one will be actually the most important for Indian conglomerates eyeing on exporting green hydrogen to Europe. I think there was a list of 8-9 certification schemes, and people are asking which one they should actually focus on. No?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and I would let also Paula to comment on everything that I say. But yeah. Right.
Okay. No, you have it. Wonderful. Yeah, it's impressive. It seems like a lot of participants were impressed that so much certification schemes are already being under development.
Yeah, indeed. So most of them, just to make it clear, they are linked to, for instance, particular subsidy schemes, right? So I'm most familiar, I live in the Netherlands, I'm most familiar with the SDE++ criteria that essentially defines what green hydrogen production projects have to fulfill. What are the criteria in order to be eligible for government funding? And I think that's the same or similar thing with the EEG ordinance in Germany, but also in other countries. To the question of what eventually you would have to follow if you were importing to Europe, everything in Europe will be set out by the Renewable Energy Directive and the delegated acts that I've talked about. So that will define the rules of the game, but that will not be a certification scheme, very likely. So there will more likely, in my opinion, be different certification schemes that will be eligible or they will be recognized under the Renewable Energy Directive. That's the similar system now to biofuels in Europe. So then what exactly would you have to follow? It would be more likely that you have to follow, for instance, the CMS 70 from Paula's company. Yeah, that essentially would be the answer to it. Unless, Paula, you want to add to something to that?
Yes, wonderful. Any comments from your side, Ms. Auer-Saupe? I think there was a question if even a D norm is already developed, so maybe you could shed some more light on this.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with that what Jan said. It's really interesting what is going to be published with the delegated acts at the end of this year. This will have a major impact on all certification criteria. They will need to adapt what the EU wants to see to be adapted as a certification scheme. Regarding your question, if a DIN norm is underway, there is an ISO Technical Committee 197 which concentrates on hydrogen technologies. So they are really focusing on the technical part of hydrogen. To my knowledge at the moment, there is no ISO standard on green hydrogen. So we will see the voluntary standards for a couple of years in future, like certify CMS 70, ISCC.
Yeah, thank you. Then I see there's a lot of questions on the criteria that may become very critical for our Indian companies eyeing on exporting green hydrogen to Europe. I'll just go through a few. You just please pick it up. There was, for example, one question on the geographical correlation between the source for green power and the green hydrogen production. I think Silaji, you showed a slide, and the question was, is there any, let's say, maximum distance allowed for this correlation, or how are you going to define this criteria of geographical correlation?
Yeah, good question. I think the answer is quite simple. By the way, everything that I'm saying is not final yet, right? So the European Commission did not yet decide on everything. It's not yet public. I think one of you, the other presenters, mentioned that it will be likely published in December this year, but that is, well, also not completely certain. Let's put it that way. Might be delayed. But all these things that I also said are still under discussion. But as far as we know, the maximum distance is defined by the bidding zone. If there is no bidding zone in the country, it is the country itself. Right. So for India, I'm not super familiar, but I assume there is not the concept of bidding zones. Then the whole Indian country would be recognized as the same bidding zone in that definition.
Thank you. I think that was clear. I think there's one more question for you, Ms. Auer-Saupe. If you could elaborate a little bit more why the mass balance becomes so relevant for green hydrogen. And you also spoke about some extra criteria. Maybe you can shed some more light on this.
To switch on the mic. Yes, of course. The mass balance system is the system that is going to be accepted by the EU and which is already used for sustainable biofuels. And it really considers the whole value chain, really from the beginning of the cultivation of the raw material until the end of the supply chain. And it's supposed to be a very constant approach for certification. And the additional criteria you were asking for, there we really, you're talking about Green Hydrogen Plus and the new standard coming up in December. There we really had a look at the RED II directive and the different requirements in regard to temporary correlation, as well as regionality. So we are picking up these criteria and implementing it already in our standard to be in line with RED 2. Yeah. If you're interested, we can share the new standards as soon as it is published with you, and you can distribute it to the audience if that's interested.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Auersaup. I think there's one more question here for you, just of curiosity. Someone is asking if TÜV is actually already certifying regular hydrogen and ammonia in Europe, so any gray hydrogen, or if there is no certification so far at all in place.
We are actually focusing on the certification of green hydrogen. There is the possibility under certify to certify low carbon hydrogen. At the moment, there is a focus on nuclear energy, as carbon capture and storage is still difficult to certify within Europe, as storage is not totally regulated at the moment. So.
But you would have also an office, someone is asking, in India, which can be approached to intensify the dialogue about potential hydrogen certification, green hydrogen certification in India too, yeah? Is there an office of the
Yes, we have several offices. So we have one in Delhi, we have one in Mumbai. So with pleasure, we can talk more deeply about certification. Yeah. If you want, we can share the contacts after our conference. Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much. So TÜV Süd is ready. We heard EEX is also ready, Ms. Brandes. You said from 2025 onwards, you actually see that this is going to happen on the ground, and trading is going to happen. There are specific people in the EEX which are preparing for this day. I mean, investment in green hydrogen production needs at least also 3 years in advance. So yeah, maybe you can shed some more light on this very optimistic 2025. Are you already trading ammonia maybe? So it is for you not a big difference now that you switch to green ammonia. Maybe you can shed some more lights on the timelines on a commercial basis.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question, and thanks a lot for the opportunity to shed some light or clarify some misunderstandings. When it comes to 2025, I would say we, in a best case, really in a best case, we will see first hydrogen grids in Europe. From the trading perspective, we then 2025, 2026 plan with starting hydrogen trading on a cluster basis, let's call it that way. So we expect hydrogen grids in Europe to start in clusters and islands somehow, and then be connected physically through the so-called European hydrogen backbone over the years and decades to come. So we expect with trading piped hydrogen on a small level, on a small scale, on a limited regional level, let's say, in Europe, probably then from 2025, 2026 onwards. However, as I said, other forms of hydrogen transport through ships, trucks, trains, and so on, that is something that can start earlier, dependent, of course, on the physical availability of hydrogen. I mean, hydrogen is there already. Gray hydrogen is, of course, already there. ammonia is already there. We are not yet active in these fields. They have not yet been within our market portfolio. But when it comes to trading, let's say we don't plan with starting a market and having a liquid market by next year or tomorrow or anytime soon. But we starting at a small scale with rather illiquid markets in the beginning, of course, and then grow that step by step together with the maturity of the market.
Exciting. So if India speeds up and is willing to export green hydrogen via the ammonia route to the harbor of Hamburg, EEX would be ready to implement products that will find the right clients to offtake this ammonia. So good to hear. So if India is able to export green ammonia by 23, then EEX will be ready by 23. That's a little bit what I heard. That would be super optimistic, but who knows? India is growing fast and maybe also producing green hydrogen faster than one might think today. There is one more question, I think, for you, Mr. Schiller, on what would actually count as green and renewable energy produced hydrogen in terms of technologies involved. So there is one question about using or involving renewable energy from a chlor-alkali plant. Is there some thoughts on that? Can you shed some more light on this, please?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Of course, if you would be talking about the electrolytical hydrogen made right now, essentially all of it is made from the as a byproduct of the chlor-alkali process. So that is a very relevant question. It would essentially follow the same rules as the regular electrolyzer production. It's a water electrolysis production, with the fact that then they would likely have to apply some mass balancing on the different products. That is defined and will be defined, by the way, in a different separate delegated act under the Renewable Energy Directive, and it's done by the Joint Research Center. So that's the essentially scientists of the European Commission that will define exactly how that's done in the accounting way. But you would have to follow the same rules, is the short question. Maybe quickly on the other technologies. The Renewable Energy Directive defines this again as refundable. That means the renewable fuels of non-biological origin. The non-biological is the critical part. So everything that's made out of biofeedstocks would not count, right? So biomass gasification, if you would put biomethane into a steam methane reformer, that's also not covered there. So mostly it's different types of electrolysis, and then the potential subsequent processes, right? So we discussed on a couple of times today ammonia, maybe methanol, maybe other synthetic fuels that can be made of. Those will be also covered by the criteria, and we haven't discussed that too much today, but there will be additional requirements in terms of the origin of the CO2 and also about the heat origin. So yeah, if you would be synthesizing the hydrogen further into methanol, ammonia, whatever that is, well, ammonia is not a good example because you don't need CO2, but say methanol, the red will also say where does the CO2 come from? Does it come from bio sources, or does it come from fossil sources? And potentially also where does the heat that's required for the capture of the CO2, potentially for the synthesis processes, where is that heat coming from? Again, does it come from renewable or non-renewable energy sources? Thanks.
Thank you. Then there is one more question from Ms. Brandes, or whoever would be able to answer. about what happens if, for example, the hydrogen is 80% green. Are you able to compensate by buying a CO2 tax or anything like that? So you can still export to Europe, or is that you comply or you don't comply thing? Like no, I think, I don't know, maybe, yeah, I don't know, Ms. Brandes, I don't know if this is like, you would be able to trade any product, no? But I think, I don't know, Mr. Siller, no, I think this is a question related to the carbon border tax mechanism. So is it be possible to maybe compensate if to a certain percentage it's not green?
It's a difficult question, I would say. And I mean, I understand when we think about carbon border tax, I mean, this is really related to the energy intensive industry so far, so to steel, ammonium, and 4 others. So in total, I think there are 6 energy intensive industries in there. So hydrogen is not really covered there. And I mean, there are the criteria to be certified green, and one criteria is that 100% renewable energy has to be used. So I would say either you comply with the standard or it's not accepted.
I'll just also quickly comment on that. I think that's one way to implement it, as Paula described. Although in the discussion we had with the Commission, you would, in that example it was given, be 80% compliant. So you would be importing 80% green hydrogen and 20% regular hydrogen that you will get no subsidy for. In the terms of it being ammonia, for instance, you would have to pay the CBAM for the 20% part. Right, so that was where the question was coming from as well. So they envision this being more flexible. Also, by the way, it's the same for the production within Europe, right? So you can run physically your electrolyzer around the clock, but only part of it will count as this green hydrogen or refundable, depending on how much of the criteria, what's the time when you follow the criteria under refundable. And that is important, I think, to mention, because especially in those industrial settings, you won't be able, there will be uninterruptible load, right? So that essentially when you have a steel plant, it needs the hydrogen continuously. Same for an ammonia plant. You will not ramp it up and down. So the supply has to be provided the same way, or you have to have storage, but that again is complicated. So I think you will see that many of the electrolyzers will be run around the clock, but only part of it will qualify as green, and only that part will be subsidized. So it becomes quite a complicated business case at some point to think about all these risks. Yeah, but that I think is the most likely thing. And eventually, and I think Paula, you also mentioned that, or maybe that was Miriam, that these criteria, they are important now, right? And as we move towards future and really more decarbonized electricity grids, etc., they become less relevant, because then you don't need to safeguard as much that the hydrogen you produce is very green, because it will be mostly by default anyway. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Then I don't know, we don't have that much more time, but there's so many questions coming in now. Maybe one more to you, Ms. Sauer. If to which extent these certification schemes are actually consistent. So if I go for one, do I already be able to also get the other one? No, so I think there's several mentioned here. The ones you presented, the certified, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that. Is there some gold standard which I fulfill and then I get all the other certificates easily?
Mm-hmm. At the moment, the criteria are similar in certain areas, but they differ quite well. And what will be established is similar as for the electricity a functioning guarantee of origin system with registries where the hydrogen can be traded. And for the guarantees of origin in regard to electricity, there's the AIB, Association of Independent Bodies, where the guarantees of origin can be traded. So there will be a minimum requirement how to be accepted as a guarantee of origin, and then they can be traded. And then there can be some additional criteria on these guarantees of origins, like for example, green hydrogen plus, where additional criteria are met. So there will be a basis requirement, and then some add-ons can be used.
Okay, thank you. Then, yeah, so many questions. Maybe one more on these for Mr. Siller on the temporal resolution. There's a question about these three regarding temporal correlations of RE and H2 production. I don't know if I get it. It says what determines which temporal resolution, 15 minutes, hourly, annual, actually needs to be applied. Is it depending on the contracted offtake stipulations in the belonging PPA?
I think you understand it well. It's yeah. The question I think is essentially how strict the temporal correlation will be, and if that depends on different types of setups. This is not yet clear. So what I put on the slide are the different options that the Commission is still considering. They have not decided yet on how strict the temporal correlation would be, and it will be the same for regardless on your setup, and there will be no differences. There was a leaked draft of the delegated act a couple of months ago, which talked about the most strict of them all, the 15-minute correlation. I think it is safe to say now that that will not be the case in the final formulation, because I think they had a lot of backlash from industry saying that that's too strict and it's almost physically impossible in a lot of countries to do, and it will create a lot of administrative burden and additional costs, obviously, because quite logically, right, the stricter you make the electrolyzer to follow, the more additional cost in the production of the hydrogen you incur. So it's a bit of a balance between how strict you want to make it and the financials of the production.
Thank you. Speaking about financials, I don't know, Mr. Sauper, you're a technical expert of TÜV Süd, but on commercials, there's the question of how much more expensive the green hydrogen will become after certification. And maybe let me add, there's a second question, how long it would actually take for TÜV Süd to certify green hydrogen. I think it depends a little bit, no, where in the whole chain you do the certification. But yeah, maybe a little bit more on timelines and this premium. Yeah, it is already priced in, I guess, if you're trading at EEX, because there's no other way to trade at EEX if it's not certified. But yeah, price for certification and timelines.
Okay, I can maybe talk something about timelines. So we have an existing auditor pool at TÜV Süd, and if someone would like to get certified, we would first send a checklist, what kind of documents we would like to see. Then we receive the documents in advance, and then an on-site audit would be planned. So where we verify is the information giving on the documents in line with the situation on site. Afterwards, we will again have a discussion, and then we can write a report and hopefully close the certification. So in total, if everything works well, maybe 3-4 months. Certification will be closed. And regarding the question on pricing, I would like to hand over to Miriam, because I think she has more insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, there is some kind of trading probably with green hydrogen certificates, so with a green premium. But well, we are not running this market, so I have no knowledge, and I guess hardly anyone has knowledge apart from the contracting parties, let's say, on the prices. But there will, of course, be a kind of a green premium that that is paid from the consumer to the producer for green hydrogen. That is, yeah, something. This green premium becomes transparent when compared to the gray equivalent, to the fossil equivalent, let's say. Whether it's priced in or not, that very much depends on the structure of the market in a mass balance system. That is probably sure. In a system where certificate and energy carrier can be traded separately, then the green premium becomes transparent in the price for the certificate. So it depends on the market, and yeah, and the transparency is not yet there, to be very clear.
Good. Yeah, I think let's close this session good in time. A lot of questions. I think you all agreed, Ms. Jocham, Teresa said it, you already agreed to share your presentations. So to all our listeners and participants, if you have registered with the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce, you will receive a link where you can download all the presentations. And if the speakers agree, contact details may also be shared. I was asked by IGCC to also announce that there is a virtual German delegation upcoming to India in 10 days, from the 6th to the 10th of December. A virtual delegation is happening with lots of German companies coming out of the renewable energy and the storage technology area, with focus on vehicle charging. So if you're interested in this, please also just answer on the email invitation from IGCC and ask for the profiles of the German companies to get in touch and to know how to get involved. And Teresa, I think we are good in time. I would use this to thank again our speakers for their valuable inputs. Very exciting what's happening in Europe, and India is following closely the developments. Renewable energies, I think you must be aware, India has 365 days of sunshine. So we don't have these fluctuations as we have in Europe, seasonal fluctuations. There's monsoon in India, but the monsoon is not everywhere in India. It's only in some regions of India and wandering through India. So one can really say India counts on baseload solar. And this means that India is able to really produce hydrogen, green hydrogen with solar energy at lowest cost, and seriously considering to export green hydrogen to the world at lower cost. If we take into account the analysis of Bloomberg New Energy Finance at around $1 per kilogram before 2030 possible. So yeah, exciting to see that Europe is preparing itself for importing green hydrogen. Certainly Europe wants to know that it is really green, and therefore it needs to be certified. We are hearing TÜV Süd is ready to certify your green hydrogen in India, with several offices already in place. European Union may decide pretty soon on the final criteria. Mr. Silla, maybe final comments from all our speakers, starting with you, maybe connected with the question, when do you see final decision by European union coming in on the criteria, or if you would like to make a statement on another point, please feel free to do so, and we'll use this as closing remarks. We'll switch then to Ms. Auer Saupe, and the last word from Ms. Brandes. And Teresa, I don't know if I have forgotten anything else. I would then just say 2-3 short vote of thanks. Yeah, please, Mr. Sila.
Thank you, Tobias, and thank you for the great moderating, and Teresa for organizing all of this. Yeah, so just on that criteria, the official date is 14th of December this year that they have to come out with the final criteria. As I mentioned before, it might be in March because they are, of course, it's quite complex to make sure that it's all correct. So it might take a bit longer. Definitely keep your eyes open because it will be definitely under heavy debate and very important in terms of going forward. And thanks for all your great questions. It was very enjoyable to me as well.
Yeah, please, Ms. Auer Saupe.
Yeah, also thanks a lot from my side. It's interesting times we are living in. We just had COP26. Now we are waiting for the delegated acts. So so many important decisions that needs to be taken, and yeah, looking forward to accompany this time with our certification and to bring transparency into the system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Brandes.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation. For us, it's also a very interesting time. It's the first time we look at developing a market really from scratch. I mean, normally we go into a market that is physically there, and that is also interesting for us, and we really want to use the experience we gained over the past 2 decades, basically, of energy trading, to take the best out of that for also starting hydrogen markets and accompanying this ramp-up process. Many thanks for the organization and the invitation.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again to our speakers from Guidehouse, TÜV Süd, and EEX for Indo-German Chamber of Commerce having organized this knowledge session. Indo-German Energy Forum Support Office. Thank you very much, Teresa, for having organized this session together with Indo-German Chamber of Commerce. Certainly the German Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, which have tasked us to do such knowledge sessions. Teresa, I think this is already knowledge session number 4 already. So I think almost all of them are also available on YouTube and also covered by our media partner, Fuel Cell India. Thank you very much for Fuel Cell India continuously covering these events and spreading the word about these exciting global developments. And last but not least, let me thank you as our listener and participant. We look forward to further interact with you. Any questions, any requests, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us. And yeah, looking forward to maybe see you in person anytime soon. And with this, we will end. And Pierre Melenge. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.